Right, welcome everybody. This is the panel on voice assistants and the path of ubiquitous compute. We are live indeed. Right. I'm really excited to be here, also with my fellow panelists, let me introduce them quickly. So today we've got with us Christine. Quick wave, Christine. Hello, brilliant. So Christine is the Global Voice Coordinator for Nestle. This role involves driving awareness, understanding, and implementation of voice in Nestle with the digital marketing space. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
Next, we have Anshu. Quick wave, there we go. Anshu is a designer working on mapping of conversational experiences for voice and other emerging technologies for the Magenta Voice program at Deutsche Telekom. Prior to this, she was a lead designer for Bixby, Samsung's intelligent assistant. Welcome, Anshu.
Thank you.
Right, next we have Hassan. Hassan is a senior voice and AI experience architect at VUI agency. For the past decade, he has been designing experiences for digital interfaces, mainly concept development of custom voice assistants for major brands. Welcome, Hassan.
Glad to be here.
Brilliant. And then last but not least, Jeff. Jeff is a lecturer in computer science at the University of Glasgow. He is leader of the Glasgow Representation Information Learning Lab, GRIL for short, that performs research on text understanding and conversational AI. He teaches NLP and conversational UX. Previously, he worked on NLP in Google Research and machine learning intelligence and was a founding member of the Google Assistant Response Ranking team. He was recently awarded a Turing AI Acceleration Fellowship to develop the next generation of information assistants. That feels like a round of applause in its own right. Welcome, Jeff. Glad to have you.
Pleasure.
So, over this kind of like next hour, we thought we wanted to take everybody here on a journey from kind of like where we are now in terms of kind of like voice and kind of like assistance, kind of like capabilities, what it means for users and brands, and then really kind of like build up a vision towards this kind of notion of ubiquitous, or I was told, because apparently that's an old term, these days we talk about ambient kind of computing. Now, the way we thought we'd do this, we will have kind of like 4 major sections within the panel discussion. Each of our panelists will do a quick intro into the topic, and then we'll kind of have a discussion about it. We will monitor the questions as much as we can on the Agorify platform. So any kind of things you would like to ask, just go and add them right here in our chat, and I'll try to integrate them as much as we can, because we're really keen to kind of have this as an open, kind of like more informal discussion. As a quick icebreaker, we thought, let's start off, or I ask our lovely panelists to kind of give us a quick kind of intro. So how come each one of you decided to work on ubiquitous assistants? Jeff, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll go first. I guess my research kind of started a while back when I started grad school. I was looking at how to make search engines smarter, how to make them understand the world using entities and knowledge graphs, and kind of part of the world around us, hopefully ubiquitous, everything that exists in the world. So I did my PhD, and then I went to Google Research, where I was working on language understanding. And when I was there, I was working on health research. And so I was helping develop kind of some of the next generation of health products. And what you quickly realize is that a search box is not a very good way to talk to a search engine about your health information needs. And that you really need to have an interactive health assistant that could actually engage with you. And also, it's the fact that it's taking in sensor data. So it's not just a text query. You need to know everything about a user in a much deeper way. So that really started thinking, how can we actually build experiences that take into account all of the different aspects of sensors, of interaction, and kind of really start to build the future of what that looks like. So I went to work on the Google Assistant for a while, and now I'm back here in academia, kind of working on what that looks like from the research side, and what that looks like for the future of assistants.
Brilliant. Christine, you want to go next?
Sure, yeah, happy to. So I wish my journey was as linear and as clear as Jeff's, but it was very much more by accident than by direction, let's say. I actually, as part of Nestle, we run a digital immersion program, so looking at kind of what digital innovation is, some of the methodologies around that, and then working on short-term projects to try out different technologies in the digital innovation space. And from our program, which they run in San Francisco in our Silicon Valley Innovation Outpost, I first got exposed to voice about 4 years ago, obviously when Alexa was starting to gain some traction over there. And fortunately, got offered a role in Barcelona in our conversational AI team. So originally I was looking at chatbots on voice, but focused over the last 18 months more on the voice side of the house. And in the last year or so, working a lot more on strategy rather than kind of the IT implementation of it. So I'm kind of coming from both sides in terms of understanding of voice.
Brilliant. Anshu?
Okay, so yeah, I think I would say that I've worn quite a few hats before moving on to voice, but I started with something called S-Voice. That was Samsung's very first, voice-related solution, and we had implemented that into a car experience where we had a car mode designed for the Samsung Galaxy phones, and we had voice as a feature there. So that's where my actual journey into voice started, and then Bixby came along. So the first version bringing out the second one, and I think all of this was over the last 4 or 5 years, and now I'm here. So, and I'm like loving it. So no complaints.
Brilliant. Hi,
Great.
Hassan.
Well, I think mine started maybe 5 years ago. Due to the fact that I love challenges, I love to kind of explore new interactions. Since design is about facing challenges and trying to find solutions for them. And that was the time, more or less, as Christine was saying, that Alexa was getting more tractions. But I think we started a little bit before in my previous company, where we actually did a chatbot, where the tools around it were actually very limited and no one really knew how it works and how can we do it even. And I would say we started to explore how can we be in that realm. And then slowly we got other, I would say, briefs and projects that is related to voice. And I was very happy to jump on it, although I didn't really know that much about it. And here we are talking about voice assistants.
Yeah. Indeed. Brilliant. So with this, I'm going to start sharing my screen and show you a lovely image and hand over to Christine to, give us a bit kind of like where we are.
Thank
right
you.
now.
Yeah. So what I wanted to talk about first of all was kind of where voice or assistants are as a touch point and the impact on brand and the audience and thinking about what it means in that space. So obviously Nestle, I'm sure like other companies are starting to experiment, with voice, with the usage of virtual assistants, and only really starting to think about how is that an extension of our brand. We're kind of going through a phase where maybe voice or virtual assistants were considered a bit more of as a novelty, let's say, rather than a meaningful brand asset. But I would say that that's really evolving right now. And as an asset, it has a lot of potential to assist the consumer, to give them guidance, to enable them to find out more about the products that they're interested in. But obviously, there's still a number of challenges for brands when kind of entering to this space. The first of these I kind of see is around the ROI, so the return on investment of an interaction with these new channels. Obviously, because it's an emerging space, we don't necessarily have visibility over market penetration or kind of clear information on usage or interactions. And what we're kind of having to do is, take the understanding that we have from more traditional channels and established channels and to try and then interpret that into this. So I think, whilst we can do that, there's still some lack of visibility over how we really establish that ROI and how we really kind of justify those investments going forward. And then the second, if I were to ask maybe one of the brand managers at Nestle, what does your brand sound like? I think it's a really difficult question right now because, over the last decade or two, we focus so much more on like, what does your brand look like? The text associated with it, the packaging. We're pretty obsessed with the screen. So, what does your brand sound like is a challenge that brand teams have to almost start considering again from the age of like radio, is like thinking about that type of media. And then the third challenge I would say is also around the complexity of use case. So I think at this moment we're still in, some element of basic interactions with voice and simplistic interactions, setting a timer, playing music, what's the weather. And the challenge for me, and also I guess the platform providers, how do you take consumers beyond that? How do you take them to a more meaningful brand experience? How do we explore new areas of functionality and take them on a journey? It's a challenge of how much can we help the consumers with that. And I would say beyond this, beyond these challenges, we obviously have the dilemma of how much control that we have over our brand presence. For example, how much control do Amazon and Google have when someone is searching via voice and is looking for our products? How is that content served? And obviously that continuously raises questions about, should we be thinking about white labeled solutions versus interactions on these channels that have obviously got quite a lot of momentum going for them. So that was my short introduction of kind of where I see it now in terms of voice and the potential impact on brands.
No, thank you for that. And I think it's I mean, ROI, we know kind of like drives most things. So if I give you kind of like another chance to dive a bit more detail of what is your kind of like short and long term aspects here when we're talking about ROI, kind of what do you feel kind of like investments are justified when we're talking about?
It's a really good question. I think what we've tried to do in Nestle is give an element of prioritization for a start. So think about the markets where voice is really gaining traction. So firstly, establishing the priority and understanding in that space. And that there's still an acknowledgement that voice is new, that there's going to be some element of unknown. There have to be some investment into this innovation space, understanding the space, going through test and learn processes to understand what sticks, what adds value. And I think there's got to be an element of acceptance that there can be failure in that area. And that's something quite hard as an organization to take on board, because we're not completely, we don't take a lot of risk. We're pretty risk averse. So how do you then coach around that? As I say, you can obviously try and establish ROI from other digital channels and understand that space a bit more. I think maybe with voice search, we can kind of do that a little bit more than maybe some of the other interactions with voice, but it's something that is evolving. And I guess in the longer term, as I say, it is going to be around better visibility, better transparency around voice usage, voice data, because without that, it's difficult to understand what does good look like and how do we establish that. I think it's really interesting that there is an evolution of kind of these white labeled experiences, and there's a reason for it, because there's a need for understanding, the touch point to a greater depth. And so, as a company, we also need to be thinking about, where does voice come in the longer term? What does that look like in terms of our consumer journeys, rather than just this kind of linear shopping experience, that there's always going to be interactions beyond that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Hassan, there's an interesting kind of topic in the Q&A section, which is kind of like, how does your brand sound? Like picking up on what Christine kind of just mentioned. And so would you say that the sound of a voice assistant, should that be the same as, for example, narrators and ads? Should they be in harmony with music, jingles, whatever sound ads, etc.? And how would you achieve such brand consistency? I'm just thinking like from an agency perspective, that must be questions you kind of constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the last part, that's why we have now actually a couple of sound designers, because we believe that it's not just about the voice and the language. I mean, Voice agency has so many language experts, because voice is language communication, but also the other half of the experience is it's actually audible. So it has to include some sounds and some jingles, some music, and so on. And all of that we kind of combine together to have some sort of this how the brand should sound. We have a specific design process for this to go through. Of course, it starts with understanding the brand itself, how people perceive it. As Christine was mentioning, well, we are actually obsessed with the screen, with the visuals, and so on for the past, I think, decade. The transition now is not that easy, but we have some methods actually to go through. Okay, what does this kind of color mean? Yeah, what does the brand itself trying to show itself in a soft, in a hard way, in a professional, maybe semi-friendly way? You have different characteristics that can potentially be actually transferred to the sound or the voice of the brand. We call it a charisma or auditive charisma, because we believe that brands should have some sort of charisma coming out from it. And I would say we are still developing it, and it's still on its way to be more and more into the practice. But absolutely, it's not an easy thing to do so far. Yeah.
Great. No, thank you. Christine kind of mentioned also this notion between kind of like the choice between the kind of like different providers. And Anshu, I'm really curious on kind of like your perspective. Obviously, with Magenta, there is another platform here. There was notion about white label assistant, etc. I don't know if you want to just extend on that.
I mean, a platform, if you think about it, basically either you are building voice as an extension of your product, or you go the other way, which is build a platform around voice and let other people build with your platform, or even build your own products around the platform. So I think these are both two ways, or two of the many ways in which a brand can express themselves or put them out there, put their slogan out there. Like Hassan and Christine mentioned, I think the platform itself also gives you a certain idea around what the brand is about. What is it trying to achieve? I mean, you will see that in maybe the key, of course, most platforms now give you a global set of use cases that you can do, or you can perform on the platform. But if you are looking at, say, a specific platform which is in maybe a niche domain, like bringing voice onto the conventional telephony related market, so then you also have a potential to provide these specific use cases and support them with your platform and build upon them. So I think it's an approach that depending upon what the brand wants to achieve, what do you see your end user journeys as, not just for the present times, but in the times to come, that you decide upon, whether you want to really go with the platform approach, or maybe the existing platforms work for you. So I think I would, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great, no, thank you. And then I think one of the points you mentioned, Christine, was kind of this notion of the use cases, right? There is the simple and the complex stuff. I've seen some of your research, Jeff, and I'm always kind of like blown away by some of what's shown. And it's kind of, I somehow feel sometimes that I mean, even who I engage with, right? It's kind of like there's the expectation of, yeah, that's what's just been published in the paper. That's absolutely possible on the platforms. And I'm trying, it's like, what advice do you give people? Like, what do you think? How long does it take for your research to kind of like become available in the kind of like platform? And also kind of like, where would you say, right, seeing your half is kind of what's currently possible versus what isn't? Where are the kind of like big limitations?
Yeah, I think it's really quite fascinating. If you look back at the history of where this field is coming from, it's actually been around for a long time. Like the first computer systems were chatbots, right? In terms of looking at a lot of like natural language processing, back to ELIZA, back to a lot of those early systems. And so a lot of what we're seeing now is the technology that was developed in the 70s and 80s, that the technology is finally catching up, where we're actually having the speech recognition and the natural language processing elements being fast enough, being with the hardware advances that we're seeing, to see the adoption happen very, very quickly. That pace has been accelerating quite quickly. So the place where we're already seeing some of the major innovations that are transforming the field. So perhaps you've heard of language models like BERT or GPT-3. and some people are already starting to experiment with those things. They're currently, I mean, they're in production at places like Google and ranking and various types of tools. And so they're being adopted really fast and really widely for that. How it impacts this environment and how it's used by companies is becoming much easier. These models are exhibiting kind of qualities of what we call transfer learning, where we can actually now give it a relatively small amount of data, and the system can then learn and kind of transfer. So the really research questions here are going, how can we control that? How can we make that safe? How can we control that in a way that gives our desired output for a brand? There's some really interesting work that made me think of called style transfer. So you can say it like Shakespeare, and then it will take whatever input and say your email, but put it into Shakespearean language. And so instead you could say it like Nike or say it like Nestle, and given a couple input examples of the kinds of style and the kinds of kind of brand aspects could then transfer and make the agent automatically sound with a certain type of brand kind of persona that you would have in language usage. So it's starting quite slowly, but now we're seeing very fast rapid adoption, a really fast, exciting time to be working in this field for research, as well as hopefully for people who are adopting the tech.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks for that. You did mention safe, and kind of like, what do you mean by safe?
Good question. So I think we've all seen where some of these can go wrong. There's been some famous examples from Microsoft where it was put out on Twitter and quickly became a kind of racist and adopted some very kind of bad behavior. We've also seen the dangers of that in society for the various rhetoric that we're seeing across the kind of polarization. And so the safety here is, how do we identify the aspects of bias that might be in the models? How do we identify the potential pitfalls? If you look at Mina, if you look at some of those systems, they're trained on Reddit data. And if that doesn't scare you, it scares me. So that's something that we need to be, all the designers, all the technologists, machine people working in all elements of AI need to be thinking about where the data is coming from, how it's being used, and what safeguards we need to put into place to make sure that we can control that output.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thanks for that. So kind of talking about this kind of like cutting edge research, I think kind of what's starting to emerge is also that voice assistant used to be a kind of like your speaker, right? And I think, Anshu, I'm gonna kind of move us on to kind of like your view of kind of like, it's not just this kind of like smart speaker, that there's kind of like audio. We're looking at a much wider kind of device pool. So I'm gonna swap my slide here and I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So like you said, we are no longer, constrained to just like accessing voice on a speaker. It's around you. It's on all your devices that you can think of. Maybe it's on your phone, it's on your watch, it's on your TV. And in the future, maybe it would be a scenario where you name it and it'll be there. So if we just look at how voice has evolved, like in terms of technology, we have understood that there is some sort of strength in the understanding so many different language models, understanding so many different huge numbers and quantities of user utterances. So the efficiency of understanding or even processing voice has rapidly increased, and we have sort of achieved quite a bit there. But at the same time, research shows that voice is both fast and slow at the same time. So what do I mean by that? So when I'm speaking, I'm fast, but when I'm listening, I'm slow than, when I would be reading something. If I'm reading a text, I'm much more faster in reading it than maybe listening and then processing. So there it brings out the whole concept of maybe mixing these modalities, not just constraining ourselves to voice, but looking at touch, looking at gestures, how we combine these aspects. And maybe if we look at the stickiness of voice, the way it was predicted, it's no longer constrained to just thinking around only voice experiences. The stickiness is not the same that it was predicted like. So of course, the most natural approach then emerged as a multimodal experience that we can have around voice assistants on devices around us. And to bank upon the same approach, organizations have also jumped onto the same bandwagon. And what it allows for them is that they can see a opportunity for further brand presence. Their brand can be extended beyond just a logo on a device to sound branding, or even taking it further with customized earcons, customized personalities, which speaks so much about their brand. And of course, it gives them a lot more to do with the smart devices in their product portfolios itself. And this journey or this picture wouldn't be complete if we do not talk about our users and our customers. So what does it mean for our users? It empowers them to do so much more. We as humans, we are very, we are people who take in information with all our senses. So still now you had touch and, reading and, taking in information with sight, but then now you also have voice added onto it. So you hear information. And this is, again, it's a method of, getting in information inputs from two sensory, inputs, and that augments the user experience so much more and empowers them to process it faster, do more things with it. And of course, for customers, it's a very brilliant, time to be in, because brands are now they're embracing the context that users are in. There are, solutions that you can do solely in the comfort of your maybe house, in your living room, in your kitchen, while you're driving, maybe in your office. So brands are trying to embrace that context and bringing out solutions for those contexts. And these will, of course, lead to some sort of device-specific personalizations that you might see. Not all voice journeys would make sense in all sorts of devices. So based on the device, you will start seeing personalizations. And this would, I think, augment the user journey so much more. And lastly, I would just talk about the perceived usefulness, that it makes how it makes sense for the users. When you have information from two different outputs and they are helping you make a decision faster, it's helping you take in the information faster, the usefulness factor increases in the user's perception. That's where the voice technology or the voice aspects have brought in so much more to really take the user journeys and their experiences further ahead. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, it's interesting you say that. I mean, obviously, as a user of a number of different products, right? You get frustrated when I can do something on this device, not on this device, and it drives me mad, right? But I'm looking at Christine here, kind of like from a brand perspective. You kind of look at it, it's like, oh my God, the development effort to have a consistent experience across all of these different platforms is immense, right? And it's kind of like, how do you weigh that up? It's kind of like, do you have a strategy?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, if we could deploy across all, just doing one experience and have that ubiquitous experience, let's say, then yeah, that'd be my dream world. What we have to try and do is think about, obviously, where penetration levels are at in terms of devices. What are people using within particular markets? Are we looking to target a particular group of users? What device are they most likely going to be using? And really thinking about that consumer pain point to why are we doing this? Why are we building around this? But yeah, I think coming back to if we could be everywhere, fine, but if we can't, then let's also think about, okay, how do we create affinity around the experience that we do build? How do we create awareness as well, like potentially through some of the brand platforms that we already have to drive understanding and awareness of that space? But yeah, I think it's a challenge that is ongoing. It'd be great to have all the touch points the same, but obviously, it's never going to work like that. So we have to work within remits and priorities in that space.
No, great. And then I think Hassan, let me talk to someone who needs to make it work across all of them. Where I expect kind of like clients coming, and it's not. I mean, is it still just like, now build me an Alexa skill, right? It's kind of what's the expectation, and kind of also I'm curious. Do you see kind of patterns already emerging, right? It's like, yeah, people would like this to do in order to do voice, but they still have this in terms of a companion app. It's kind of, yeah. What's been your experience?
Well, so far I have to say there's a pattern that is kind of, I mean, it feels like voice is new, yeah, right? But to be honest, it has been there for at least 5 years or more. But still, some brands and some companies still treating it as, well, it's a new technology where we want to have a voice. Normally they say voice app because they are not really aware if it's a voice skill or Google Action, or which platform they want to go on. So we still have the same request of like, well, I just want to be there because other companies are there, and it's apparently it's friendly and a lot of people are there, and it's easy to use, and all of the normal things that we all know about, right? It's usable and it's a little bit useful and so on. It's also the gate maybe, or one touch point of for my brand. But I think the challenge here is to go more into the technical side, to be honest. A lot of things, of course, are available there if you want to go to the platforms that are already there, which is really great and which is really amazing. I mean, the fact that a lot of people actually have these devices in their homes makes the effort to just deploy and have some sort of a skill or voice app is really easy with the current toolkits or the current SDKs, or even just if you go to the Google or Amazon skill kit. But the fact to have the best experience, to have this kind of key killer use case that people actually love and use, and among the huge spectrum of all the skills that they have there, which of course will lead us to talk about the discovery problem, because you can have as many skills as you want as a brand, but then you will actually you will see that, well, you're not the only one. There are thousands and thousands of them there. But I think the key pattern here that, well, people don't really know which kind of use case we should do. And we are not really sure if we should have voice or not. And I think one of our questions that we ask in the first place, well, maybe voice is not the channel for you. Maybe voice is not what you actually need for a brand. So we have to make sure that this is actually what people need, not you as a brand, want to have. And well, we have to really have a balance here between user needs and the business opportunities that we have there. But mostly we have entertainment, e-commerce, and I would say automotive kind of use cases or industry. And so far they're very similar in terms of the requests. But what we try to do every time is to actually build the brand in terms of personality, in terms of the voice and sound branding, to have that as a step first. And of course, along the way, because it's a very long-term journey, we kind of develop the personality more, we develop the assistant more. Is it one voice assistant, like voice skill or voice app, or actually several ones? Is it better to go there or to show maybe something on some screens? Because as we know, voice will always need a screen to display, more information there. And we have to kind of play with this interconnectivity between the different channels that the brand has. Because one coming to us with just a request of having I just want to have this voice app, I think it's not enough. I mean, the experience itself, especially with brand, has to be in play there.
If I can just piggyback, this is going to piggyback on that a little bit. There was when I've interacted with several companies who are building what I call voice apps. Some of them were quite simplistic in the sense that a lot of them were the command and control. That I want to take what I do in my app, translate that into voice, and that doesn't translate into a good experience for lots of reasons that the other panelists kind of know very well. And what I've always tried to push people to do is, what information needs do people have? How can you actually satisfy like deeper context that they're trying to accomplish more interesting goals that might appear on voice in a way that is not just controlling turning on a TV or setting a timer or whatever it happens to be for that person's app or brand. So there's that side of it that I think would encourage people to go deeper on that information side. I think the challenge from a technical side is, if in this multimodal world, if I send something to my phone and then the person reads it, opens it, and then how could they ask a question? How does the computer actually keep the context of, oh, I've scrolled down to that paragraph and now I'm talking about what do I need to do about this part of it? That context of what we're doing across devices, keeping the context, not just in the conversation, but across modalities, and that context is still not really well supported in a lot of the platforms that we have today to keep that context. It's a hard challenge.
Yeah, I think just to add on that, I think there is an element of shiny object syndrome that we try and avoid with voice, because, you know, it shouldn't be like I think Jeff touched on, like an extension, like a carbon copy of what you already have just in voice. You know, it needs to be meaningful and actually adding value. And for us, it's more, you know, there's always been a push more towards quality rather than quantity. We did go down that route when mobile apps started coming out, and we were like, okay, we need a mobile app for every brand. And you know, in the end, what happened? They didn't get used. We had to shut them down. You know, and I don't want to go through that experience with voice. It's more about, let's really think about where voice is needed, where does it add value, and then how do we subsequently execute against that.
Christine, there was a question actually in the chat by Mark, kind of asking if you have an example of a great voice experience that you built at Nestle.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So where we've kind of focused more is on brands that have either repeatability or are guidance giving. So for example, in our pet care experience, you know, it may be around giving food recommendations, or giving recommendations when you're looking to take on a cat or dog. Again, in the baby care space as well, there's a lot of moments that you do need to be hands-free, especially when you are looking after the baby. So how do we either create kind of delightful experiences around using our products, which are not maybe directly related, or how do we give guidance? And then more in the coffee space, and I should actually say we also have experiences in the recipe space as well, is more about that repeatability. So for example, you know, thinking about, like, you know, if you run out of coffee, if you run out of an espresso, how can I reorder that easily? And it's something that we're working on at the moment with them, is like taking away some of the pain point of that. So that's kind of the major categories that we're looking at the moment.
If you don't mind me, I mean, it's for everyone here on the panel as well, is that there's another question, which is kind of like, sales in most cases are still being done on e-commerce or brick and mortar stores, kind of like talking about this kind of like relation to getting kind of like your coffee. Do you already have a way of how you can kind of like track back from voice to analyze the ROI that kind of contributed to that?
Not if it's through, obviously through the Amazon platforms. If we're doing sales through that, then not that I'm aware of, because it's something that we're looking to try and understand more of, like how much is those sales, you know, whether it's directly through one of our voice experiences, or you know, potentially Amazon is selling the product on our behalf. But that's what we're looking to do, is gain ownership and actually push some of the ordering process through our direct-to-consumer channels, so that we can monitor and understand that a bit more. It obviously has a bigger lift in terms of the technical requirements to be able to do that, but I think, again, that, you know, I'll let the other panelists talk, but again, I'm sure this is something that is not quite there in terms of that direct relationship as you.
Yeah, I would just add, I would say maybe what you said, maybe the short term, but I think for me, the long term is the building the trust that you have with the brand, which kind of, when we talk about ROI on it, well, it's kind of hard to grasp where it comes from, right? But for me, voice is one of these long-term relationships with the brand, between the customer and the brand. So if it's really done well, and people will get more engaged, more active on your voice app or in your voice assistant platform, then you can somehow get this into your at least your KPIs and so on, to see how well your brand is performing and how people are actually getting more and more aware of it, even if it's not there, or even aware of the products that they actually provide there. But definitely what you said is still a challenge. Yeah.
So I think with that, Hassan, I'm actually going to keep you on the mic. You prepared some quite lovely slides for us that kind of like shows what this kind of like future interaction might look like, kind of like in the home and external. So over to you.
So what we see in this image, it's kind of our future. I mean, you would be maybe expecting some sort of sci-fi, high quality, I don't know, kind of big builds of shiny tech stuff there. But what I can imagine is, I mean, at least for the next 10 years, is more of this calm technology. I mean, voice with the current electronic and technological and even technical advances is really, really tiny, really small. I mean, what do you need to have a voice activated device or even voice activated space? Is really, really, really small things. I just need a speaker and an input, of course, with the mic, and yeah, a connection to some sort of network. It could be Wi-Fi or a cell phone. But at the end of the day, you can practically have so many sensors, so many small, really, really small activated devices there, or small chips in these devices. So then everyday normal objects that surrounding you at home might be smart in a way or another. Smartness here doesn't necessarily mean that they just have some sensors and they can be aware of what you or how you interact with them and how they monitor their statuses. So if we talk about, can we go to the other one?
Yes, already over.
Sorry, that can we? Yeah, just go to the previous one. Is what I meant. Yeah, still.
Sorry,
still at home. Okay, so so what do you have there is more of abundance, I would say, of devices. We can talk, of course, about the privacy and how this might affect us in our data and how much we're willing to give and how much we're not willing to give. Of course, I mean, I believe in the choice of, well, you just ask people if they want to have this and that. And I think, as I remember now, the Steve Jobs, just people are actually smart. Yeah, you just ask them if they want to give this permission or not every time. But nonetheless, I mean, having more context, having more smart assistant, as we all aspire to have, at least from brands and also from us as an agency, we would like to design for these smart cases. We need more inputs, right? We need more context. And this is something that I think, research out there is trying to do, to get more understanding of how people do things, of how people actually interact with different devices, to give smarter responses and smarter interactions. But at the end of the day, I think then we would reach a point where we have that space or home as some sort of one entity in a way, because typically maybe you can speak anywhere. You don't have to just speak to a certain speaker that's lying down there. You don't have to even look at it to speak to it. You can just speak anywhere and it will be understood what you are saying, and it also would be understood what you are intending to do. Then I think this will be a very interesting point where we will have some sort of a personality or an assistant that it's flying there at your home, which will then, I think, have some sort of a challenge to maybe the big platforms and how they even display the brands that are existing there. Meaning, well, Alexa will be just, the Alexa home, meaning that Alexa's the only assistant or the only personality that's there, and the other personalities of other apps on it will not be having very visible appearance there. I think that will be actually a question. Another question or a challenge, in my opinion, would be the interoperability, or how well the devices or the things I have. I mean, if we just look at this photo frame there, should I buy it from a certain vendor, which they just sell it for, or to work with this certain platform, and I cannot connect it to any other platforms? And what will happen then if all of them can connect to all the platforms then in my home? I mean, at the end of the day, I think people will just use the convenience or the convenient ease of use that, okay, I just have one platform, or I have one assistant in my home, and I will just get everything that is working with that assistant, right? So I think the question of, well, can everything work together or not, will be a challenge. So if we go outside home, that's the next one. I do believe that voice assistant will also play a huge role there, because it's not. We will reach a point where it's not really necessarily essential to speak in a quiet environment. I mean, this is why, as we know, all the smart speakers are just at home, because I mean, away from the TV noise and other background noises, it's really easy to talk to them there with all the noise cancellation and the beamforming. But maybe technology will actually be better than where you can actually speak on the street, where a lot of aspects and a lot of noises are there. But then, in the same time, you will have other types of noises around you. So you have, of course, advertisements on the street where trying to actually talk to you, not just display certain visuals to you, but even interact with you when you just go nearby, or even in a world where the traffic is now very normal to have autonomous cars on the streets. These cars will also try to talk to you, because some sort of interaction between, well, can I pass, can I not, and so on and so on. So we will have also voice out there. I mean, given the fact that people till today actually are very shy to speak in public to their voice assistants, because, well, I mean, I think it's very related to the very, very, very first Bluetooth headphones, where people actually just, you see them on the street, and I mean, I wasn't there even, and people would actually just talk, and people around them were like, who are you talking to? You know, I mean, there were actually another human being on the other side, but still people were actually surprised. But in this case, we'll have people talking to their voice assistants, and I think we'll have that moment where people are, well, it's fine, it's not really a problem. But until then, or in that point, we will have other challenges outside of home, which I think voice will bring, and yeah, we will try to understand then how we can actually shape that environment around it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Hassan, for that. That was really great. And I think there's a question on the chat from Kane, which is, how much of this ubiquitous computing vision do you think depends on Amazon and Google's ecosystem versus independent brands creating their own omni-channel AI first touch points? I mean, Anshu, I was kind of thinking as well, is from, like, in this world, what's it going to look like? I mean, are we going to have like open source? I'm going to throw in privacy first kind of assistance starting to emerge. I mean, we've seen the privacy topic coming up a lot, and we do actually need to bring it up here as well. But yeah, I mean, as someone who has a platform in the open, kind of, what do you think?
Yeah, I think privacy is one of the biggest concerns that I think any platform is finally, trying to deal with. And but I really I'm hopeful that we will have solved these privacy issues by at least some point in the near future. And I do highly, as a personal opinion, believe in the interoperability of platforms. And that's also basically, I think, because of my own fear around privacy, that if I give all my data to just one platform, what am I going to do if that gets hacked or something? But having said that, I think we have to look at a future where you will see certain platforms who are much more ahead in very niche domains, or maybe say public transport, or city administrations, maybe a smart city system. There would be platforms which are built to support these sort of interactions, and then you will of course have your lifestyle sort of platforms which will support your lifestyle related voice interactions. So then you will see a future where these two worlds need to at some point work together. And I highly believe that open source is a good way to go, if only if we can resolve the privacy related concerns as soon as possible. So from the perspective of a platform, I have been working on two platforms. Like, I worked on the Bixby platform and now on the telecom one. So if I have to now tell you about the differences between these two, the approaches, it's completely different. With Samsung, it was a much more, lifestyle IoT, and bringing in that assistance within that sphere. But in telecom, the platform, is much more, or the business is so much more focused on the telephone, internet services, and building a platform which supports, or augments those business services that we want to provide to our customers. So there is clearly a difference. And I think we will see this even going forward in all the different platforms that might even come up, or the existing ones that we have.
Yeah, I'm hopeful too. I don't know, Christine, from your perspective, because you brought up this interesting point when the question was asked about the how do you track your kind of your commerce through it in order to do ROI, and you kind of like talked about this notion of, right, if something is sold from Nestle through Amazon, like actually getting that data in, like if in this like how do we get to this aspect where you as a brand actually know where your assets are actually used? How do they translate that? And I guess then you want to know that personal aspect that you can kind of figure out, how do I do a recommendation around my products back into those platforms?
Yeah, I think, and she touched on it, it's a real challenge right now. It's like, what element of will you accept in terms of personalization for the amount of data that you're going to give? And sometimes it's not data necessarily like from that we're getting through Nestle. As you say, it could be, the Amazons, the Googles of the world, and how do we join that data up with our own and understand it? And is that permissible now? Would you accept this element of trade-off between privacy and convenience? I mean, for me, if something's going to make my life convenient, then maybe have a bit more data on me. But I think it really depends on the individual. So I think we almost have to have this sliding scale of what are you willing to give for what are you willing to gain? And I think it's not a challenge that is maybe going to be solved today, but I'm hopeful again, like over the next few years, that we establish this boundary between give and take to be able to kind of drive the better consumer experiences and really get an understanding of the consumer so we can deliver for them as well. But I think there needs to be a balance in the two.
No, definitely. And I think just in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on to Jeff, because this is where it gets even more interesting, right? When we're all of a sudden talking about empathy and these assistants. So over to you, Jeff.
If I can just take a question from the audience real quick that was there.
Please do. Yeah.
There was a great question from Dave Howcraft that was asking, is there an interoperable feature for the voice-based systems? And how is that going to work in particularly privacy and security? And there were some really interesting and exciting developments that are happening that I just want to make people aware of. There's, if you haven't seen it yet, there's some work on the Solid project, right, from Tim Berners-Lee, looking at personal data, data privacy and data silos for ways that we can have the agents interact with data and that we control our data, and providing out kind of frameworks and kind of protocols to do so. Further, there's some exciting work happening called matrix.org. That's encrypted end-to-end kind of privacy preserving so that systems could talk in a decentralized federated system where nobody owns the data, where the systems can operate and talk to each other kind of in a remote environment. And so these are kind of building blocks that we need for some of these kind of future and the privacy preserving interoperable systems. The last one is I'll highlight there is the OVAL project from Stanford. And that's a kind of an open source platform for developing task-based agents. And so that's starting to actually develop some open source tools for these agents really for the first time. So again, kind of building on all that ecosystem that's starting to emerge and put those pieces together. So it's a quite exciting time, but there's still a lot of work to make all those pieces actually fit together and make it practical for people to use. I think that's going to be the challenge. But talking about kind of what this slide is, so I was at a workshop with kind of leading academics in information retrieval and search technology from HIPS to IR. And this was one of the titles of one of the workshops to drive the future of where we wanted the field to go. And the title of the workshop was ACE, or Ambient Cooperative Empathic Assistance, or in that case, it was actually search. So walking through those different elements, we actually had a scenario in mind. So I'll just tell a very short story there. So imagine you're planning a date. It's Friday, maybe you like to plan a date night. What are all of the elements that would go into planning that date? So you'd have to plan a menu, go shopping, maybe find someone to date as well. That might be nice. So you're not there by yourself with the candles. And maybe also buy a gift that might be personalized on the way home. So and as well as lots of other things that would go into making a successful date. But say eventually we can do those things. What are the roles that your assistant should play ubiquitously throughout each of those elements that kind of transfer all that state and all of that knowledge that goes with it. Maybe you're running late, maybe you're tired. Like, what are all those elements that it needs to know to be able to, okay, well, you couldn't plan that recipe, you're not gonna get recipe on time, so adapt and make something, simplify that. How can it help you do that to make your life easier? That's something that we don't do, right? These systems don't do now, but they should. The ambient side here is what you see here is a picture of a home connected kitchen. Maybe you make it home and you like to cook a nice dinner. And so you have obviously we have all these devices around us, but we want them to fade into the background as well. We don't want them in our face all the time. And so if we want you to kind of guide where needed. In dial-up systems, that would be system initiative. So when should the system take initiative? When should the system fade into the background? When can the system do something automatically for you? Can it automatically change the lights up and down without you having to ask? Maybe it plays the appropriate music. So maybe you start chopping really quickly, it gets you some upbeat music, and that fades into the background and changes the music when your date walks in the door, right? So without you having to make those interactions, it should be a seamless experience that is all personalized and contextualized based upon what's happening around you, how you're feeling, kind of, and responding to you that way. So there's also the elements around cooperation. Once you have a successful date, it's empathic in the sense that it takes on your goals and helps you accomplish what you're trying to do. Not necessarily in a human way, because we're not, but that might be nice eventually, but to at least to adopt your goals rather than the goals of a mega corporation or whoever happens to be controlling the platform. So all of those kind of elements together is trying to help you, it's trying to understand your goals, and it's to do that, you have to be aware of the environment in really interesting ways. Also highlight some cool tie-ins to other work. Quest project at the University of Glasgow, looking at Soli. So the next generation of Google Home devices are going to have Soli embedded in them. For those of you who don't know, those are basically radar. And so you can have then kind of a radar presentation to have. It's currently in the Pixel, I believe it was the Pixel 4. And so that allows you to do simple voice-based gestures. So maybe instead of having to say, hey, Google, stop, I can just put my hand up and say, kind of stop. I know we're running short on time, so I'll kind of stop there and maybe can discuss, or we can maybe pontificate more about what the future will look like.
So you just talked about pixels, right? And I have this vision of kind of like reading, looking at those screen and listening to you talking. It's like, isn't there a vision of Pixar's WALL-E? Right? I mean, what's going to happen to us as human society when we kind of in this world? Kind of, are we going to start preferring to talk to our assistants because they never talk back? They agree with us. It's kind of like what's your view? How anyone's on the panel, obviously. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I think we already do. We already have our phones. We're already scrolling all the time. So in that respect, it's already there. We're just not talking. But I think the bigger thing for voices is the fact that today I found myself shouting at the system more than I actually find myself getting sucked into it. And that's indicative that we have a long way to go to kind of get to the place where it feels like a natural experience, and it feels like that there's not a lot of friction in the experience. And so we have to get there and reduce that, I think, to make that possible. Curious what other people think.
Yeah, I mean, we're still in the command and control type, right? Where the assistant kind of just there waiting to be addressed, right? And commanded to fulfill what you say or user's intentions, right? So it's some sort of what we have now. I think we have some sort of maybe glimpse of the assistant where, well, the assistant itself can offer some recommendations based on what I said before, or maybe based on indirect conversation or dialogue with the assistant. But what I like about what Jeff just showed us now is the collaborative type, where I think it's another level where the assistant itself can actually formulate the intentions and try to kind of fulfill these goals in a cooperative style. So it's not just a dialogue there. I think if we talk about also conversation, it could lead to some kind of debate even, right? To reach the optimum solution or goal. So that third level, I think we are somehow still not there, which I wouldn't say that I'm afraid that we reached there. I think the fourth level, at least to me, is the autonomous one, where actually the assistant is actually working completely in itself. It has the self-governance, and it can just decide on itself what to do and what to do not. We are not there yet. I mean, if we talk about autonomous, and I mean, the only thing that comes in mind, of course, cars. Well, I mean, it's still far a little bit to say, well, we can have some sort of autonomous, I don't know, a robot at home that can, or Alexa itself that can do whatever it wants with our homes, right? I mean, cars and autonomous cars just have really long path and journey to be deployed and on a very, very big scale, which we're not there yet. And I mean,
I don't know if we're gonna. Sorry, Hassan. I'm just gonna allow Anshu and Christine to put in their kind of like quick view. I know we're out of time, but I'm just gonna keep on going. But yeah, Anshu and then Christine. You've got the last minute.
Okay, cool. So I really like the the ambient cooperative empathetic assistant. So and I think it really puts down the point that I was trying to bring out earlier, where you will see different platforms putting out their assistants, but then those assistants coming together to fulfill the goal of a household, or at least for a person. And I think that's something that is very nice to have as an aim. We want to get there. Yes. Over to you, Christine.
Yeah, not too much to add on that. I think it's the end-to-end goal for everyone really, and I think what's exciting for me is like, okay, what does that mean in terms of like dynamic content as well, and like, what are the possibilities that then allows? So yeah, really excited if we can get to that future. Brilliant. I think as everyone said though, we have a long way to go for sure.
I just want.
Brilliant. So I'm gonna just ask. Yeah, go, Jeff.
I was going to just wrap up with one really cool thing that I want to see. Thinking of the vision, so path towards ubiquitous computing. I wanted to kind of end with we're currently been working with the outer voice, but there's a movement in technology to work with the inner voice. That we don't have to actually verbally speak. And there was a really cool demo called Alter Ego from MIT that has a bone sensor that actually can track what you're saying without verbalizing. And so that is some really exciting tech, and we're moving in that direction. So it's going to open up a lot of possibilities, and that will make it even more ubiquitous.
So I'm going to ask each one of you to put up your hands and say kind of like, when do we think we're going to be there? Is this 2 years? Is it 3 years? Or are we going to be 5 years away? What Jeff just said? How much longer? The audience, please put your thoughts into the chat as well. But I'm just gonna. It's like ching chong chong here. So 1, 2, 3. What do we all think? Someone didn't listen to the instructions. This was brilliant. Well, everybody, thank you so much. I really hope the audience enjoyed as well. I wish we could keep on going because there was so much interesting stuff here. Thank you to our panelists, and yeah, apologies, no applause here, but. Right, I'll click the big red button.
Thanks very much. Bye now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.